Madonna was completely despised by Johnny Carson. This explains it. One fateful evening transformed everything. Johnny Carson was the unrivaled master of late-night television for 30 years. Over 22,000 guests were interviewed by him. From singers to presidents to regular folks with extraordinary abilities, everyone is welcome. With his characteristic Midwestern charisma, humor, and kindness, Carson greeted each and every one of them. He became a legend in the world of television thanks to his remarkable talent at putting millions of viewers at ease. But his close associates say that one guest appearance stood out in the worst possible way. An alleged difficult and perhaps furious interview with Madonna that Carson had in 1987. That uncommon flash of emotion from the renownedly controlled host. "I've never seen Johnny that upset after a segment," confessed a former Tonight Show producer who was present that evening with a chuckle. Despite his unflappable demeanor on camera, he appeared plainly distressed by the events that had just taken place backstage. "I wasn't only disappointed. Something more like to revulsion was there. Tonight, we'll take a look at the 10 reasons why Carson's reputedly deep distress over this iconic visit marked a turning point in his handling of star guests for the rest of his legendary career. We present to you the 10 cardinal sins. Your presence is much appreciated. I appreciate it. Yes, I am all right. This is a very classy ensemble. I appreciate it. Design is your forte. In one you go." With each word she spoke, she included a sexual joke. A prude was not Johnny Carson. During his 30 years as host of The Tonight Show, he gained fame for his cunning use of raised eyebrows, innuendos, and double entendres. When performed with finesse, Carson knew that sexual humor could captivate an audience of all ages. It was supposedly not the explicit sexual material, but rather the monotony and lack of nuance in Madonna's approach that irritated him during her 1987 performance. An on-air writer from that era noted that Johnny enjoyed subtle innuendo, the kind that grown-ups understood while children failed to grasp it. The thing that Madonna performed was totally unique. She managed to find an explicit sexual connotation in almost every question she asked. Craft, build, and wit were all missing. All that was there was clumsy repetition. The people who were there during the tape said that Carson tried to change the subject at first to talk about Madonna's music, her growing film career, and the cultural influence she has had. Reportedly, every time this happened, she steered the conversation back to sexual subjects, using more explicit language. A production assistant who was present for the interview remembered that Johnny was experimenting with different tactics. About her forthcoming tour, he would inquire. On the subject of what transpired behind the scenes, she would crack a joke. He would bring up her latest movie. She would make it into a direct allusion. He seemed to come to the realization after some time that he couldn't turn this ship around to go to safer waters. Both Carson's personal and professional life were allegedly disrupted by this one-note approach. According to reports, this man had spent decades perfecting his conversational skills and thought Madonna's incessant emphasis on shock value was dull and unsuitable. An associate of Carson's made the observation that Johnny once informed him that variety is the key to good comedy. His impression was that Madonna was just making the same joke, and not a very creative one, over and over again. Even more insulting than the substance itself was the fact that Johnny placed such a high value on humor and variety. Carson's response was one of professional disillusionment, not prudishness. Way a skilled artisan would react when witnessing a very gifted performer using the most simplistic and unimaginative method to get a reaction from the audience. Edgy comedy was quite acceptable to Johnny. Lazy humor that relied on shock value instead of wit was what the writer found bothersome. His disappointment was heightened by Madonna's dependence on the most inexpensive kind of attention, because he believed she was capable of much more. It's possible that I'm not very knowledgeable about this, but what do you think of my outfit? Yeah, I would get one of those if I were shopping for lingerie for someone. 2. The discussion took a back seat to her on the television. Under Carson's leadership, The Tonight Show was at its finest when it featured a seamless flow of conversation between the host and guest, a back and forth that made for riveting television. Those in the know say that Carson was really troubled by the manner in which Madonna's strategy broke this basic relationship. According to a producer who was close with Johnny Carson, Johnny saw The Tonight Show more as a forum for discussion than a stage for speeches. He was supposedly irritated with Madonna's performance since she seemed disinterested in having a conversation. She didn't see the show as a conversation, but as her own platform to act on. It became clear early on in the segment that this dynamic was there. According to several accounts, Carson would attempt to initiate conversation by asking questions, but Madonna would always react in a way that stifled any genuine debate. According to a talent coordinator who happened to be there that night, she paid him little attention during his preparations. Johnny would give Madonna these great conversation starters, but she would just say what she wanted to say, regardless of what Johnny said. It sounded like two persons were having totally different talks. According to reports, Carson's firmly held value, the art of listening, was violated by this technique. Carson had always been known for his exceptional listening skills, which allowed him to not only understand his guests, but also to respond in an honest way, evoking real situations instead of robotically delivering scripted lines. According to Johnny, the most effective interviews take place when both interviewees are fully engaged and react to each other as it happens, as pointed out by the producer. He immediately understood that wouldn't work with Madonna. Ignoring his concerns and the audience's reactions, she would remain steadfast in her pursuit of her mission. Those who knew Carson well attest that this was especially upsetting to him, because it dismantled the foundation upon which The Tonight Show's success had been built for decades. Rather than a staged performance, it seemed like the audience was watching an actual conversation unfold. If you believed Johnny, you were actually eavesdropping on a conversation between two fascinating individuals. The producer went on to say, Madonna shattered that illusion by making it obvious she wasn't there to converse, but to provoke. That fundamental disconnect made genuine entertainment impossible. Carson allegedly resorted to one of his trademark strategies, strategic disengagement, in response to this dynamic. Those who watched the interview intently said he allowed Madonna's approach speak for itself by asking simple questions and progressively ceased trying to establish a relationship. The talent coordinator thought it was interesting to see Johnny just back off and allow her to fail on her own terms. His typical inclination would have been to exert more effort to salvage the section, but he made the unusual choice to withdraw from her bid altogether. Although it made for awkward TV, the outcome was instructive about the individuals involved. How should I describe it? Well, it's known as a buoyer. Someone who uses alcohol. Yeah, I like that. Does it not sound nice? That sounds fantastic too. In an apparent effort to elevate the three, Bizier shamed Carson on his own platform. Johnny Carson remained unrivaled in his field for 30 years. He had complete control over the atmosphere, tempo, and parameters of every interaction on The Tonight Show, which he treated like his personal domain. Those in the know say that Madonna's arrival threw off the audience because it took the spotlight off of his stage for a little while. The director who worked on The Tonight Show during this period explained that Johnny was the master of making difficult situations look easy. Viewers at home witnessed something unusual that evening. Johnny Carson being visibly uneasy and unsure of what to do next. He had nearly never felt such overt humiliation as that evident agony. Carson reportedly sent a powerful message through his body language during the interview. His famed smile became more forced as the program progressed, and viewers could see him physically separating himself from Madonna by reclining back in his chair. Johnny had this way of subtly controlling interviews through his posture, remarked a camera operator who worked that night. He would lean in when he wanted to signal engagement and support, lean back slightly when something wasn't working. With Madonna, he was practically pushing his chair away from the desk. For anyone who knew his visual language, it was a clear sign of extreme discomfort. Perhaps most telling was Carson's eye contact or lack thereof during the appearance. According to those watching closely, he increasingly looked toward Ed McMahon or the camera, rather than directly at Madonna, a technique he typically employed only when a segment was going disastrously wrong. Johnny's eyes would dart to the camera almost like a hostage sending a silent SOS, recalled the director. It was his way of acknowledging to the audience, "Yes, I know this is uncomfortable, and I'm doing my best to manage it." For someone normally so in command, That visible discomfort was shocking to witness. What reportedly bothered Carson most wasn't just his personal discomfort, but how Madonna's approach placed him in an impossible professional position. As the host, he was responsible for maintaining the show's standards, while also treating guests with respect, a balance that became increasingly difficult as the interview continued. Johnny was caught in this terrible dilemma, explained the producer. If he directly challenged Madonna's behavior, he risked creating an even more uncomfortable confrontation on live television. To completely comply would be to abandon the principles he had upheld for many years. He was deeply frustrated by the circumstance because he saw no suitable options. Reportedly, this brief public outburst of emotion was one of Carson's most distressing work situations. This was one of the few occasions when the normally unflappable host seemed to really flap on his own illustrious platform. Unless it's a special, I rarely see you on TV, so I'm excited to see you here tonight. You were fantastic in that Saturday Night Live performance from a few years back. I am grateful. Enjoyed myself. As far as I can tell, this is my very first talk show. Is that right? Exactly 4. The unwritten standards of class and timing were broken by her. Johnny Carson achieved a unique blend of broad audience respect and sophisticated adult humor over his 30-year run as host of The Tonight Show. His colleagues say that this equilibrium was more than a programming tactic. It was a core principle of Carson's work ethic, and that Carson was really troubled by the ways Madonna's performance disrupted it. According to an insider who worked on the show, Johnny possessed this extraordinary talent for being both sophisticated and edgy all at once. He had a unique talent for making jokes about mature themes that were both funny to the urban elite and suitable for middle-class families to enjoy together. Night after night, he walked the tightrope with remarkable grace. Avoiding contentious issues was never the goal. Rather, this strategy aimed to handle them with poise and insight. Those who knew Carson well attest that he thought the public deserved humor that acknowledged their intelligence, instead of merely shocking them. An associate of Johnny Carson's who was involved in production noticed that Johnny wasn't against breaking new ground. Instead of displaying any real intelligence or insight, Madonna pushed them with what he perceived as a juvenile look, how mischievous I am being attitude, and that was what irritated him about her image. For him, it was a basic form of audience disdain. Carson placed equal importance on comedic timing, being able to gauge the audience's reaction and know when to back off a joke. Several sources claim that Carson's fundamental assumptions about the nature of comedy were disproven by Madonna's incessant building of tension, devoid of rhythm or modulation. For Johnny, comedy was like music. The author elaborated by saying that dynamics, pauses, build, and release were necessary. Without breaking a sweat, Madonna relentlessly pounded out the same powerful note. To someone like Johnny, who has a keen sense of humorous timing, it was like listening to someone play a piano on their hands and calling it a concerto. Carson was supposedly most offended by the artistic crudeness, the lack of technique, rather than the content of Madonna's remarks. After decades of honing his craft, this method encapsulated all of his efforts to take his act to the next level. Anyone can get a laugh by dropping their pants, but that doesn't make a good comedy, Johnny would say backstage, according to the producer. Without honoring the art he had spent his life honing, he thought Madonna was just going for the quickest way to get an audience reaction. According to reports, what started out as disappointment escalated into a more serious moral infraction due to this breach of Carson's unwritten professional code. This was his response to what he saw as a basic lack of appreciation for television as an art form, as well as a poor performance. It was his wish that I attend the University of Michigan, and I was able to do so thanks to a scholarship. That makes sense to me. Plus, I recently expressed my desire to become a dancer in New York, which isn't exactly a sure bet. Which is why he was not very happy about it. I proceeded anyhow. Number 5. She looked unconcerned by the enthusiasm of the crowd. Johnny Carson's extraordinary talent was his uncanny knack for reading the room, picking up on the audience's energy, interest, and ease with the performance. Carson was reportedly most bothered by Madonna's look since she seemed unable or unwilling to make these same important changes, according to sources close to the matter. And Tonight Show director remarked that Johnny had this extraordinary rapport with the studio audience. He had a sixth sense for when his jokes were connecting with the audience, when a segment was bogged down, or when a subject was causing discomfort, and he would swiftly adapt by building on successful moments and avoiding unpopular ones. Rumor has it that Madonna showed absolutely zero empathy during her performance. Reportedly, she refused to change her strategy and kept going in the same path after her sexually charged comments failed to resonate with the studio audience. According to a camera operator who was there that night, you could feel the audience's discomfort growing throughout the segment. These weren't prudish people. Carson's viewers adored his advanced take on adult humor. However, when Madonna made more explicit comments, their reactions ranged from uncomfortable laughter to total quiet. No matter the response, she continued to escalate, so she must have either been oblivious or unconcerned. According to reports, Carson was personally and professionally irritated by this gap between the stage and the audience. What he took as Madonna's callousness toward the audience's pain troubled him, since he held his connection with them in the highest regard. An associate producer of Johnny Carson's made the observation that Johnny considered himself the audience's spokesman. He knew that without their reactions it would have been meaningless, so he took them seriously. It was as if Madonna was ignoring the real people in the studio in favor of playing for an imaginary crowd. Plus, it went against Johnny's basic principles of quality television. People who knew Carson well said that this was especially disheartening for him, because he thought knowing one's audience was a fundamental talent for an entertainer. Reading a room was like a prerequisite for Johnny's entertaining classes. The producer went on to say, it wasn't some advanced technique, but the absolute foundation of performing. He considered it extremely unprofessional and nearly inexcusable that someone of Madonna's status seemed to be missing this fundamental talent, or even worse, to be purposefully neglecting it. Reportedly, Carson's reaction to this incident showcased his exceptional ability to read his audience. His decision to step back from the conversation allowed the gap between Madonna's approach and the audience's reaction to become more apparent without him having to awkwardly confront her or create an uncomfortable confrontation, which would have made viewers even more uncomfortable. The filmmaker noted that Johnny largely stood aside and allowed the scene to convey its own message. Here was a model of how to keep the dignity of the audience intact while dealing with a challenging circumstance. It seemed as if there was a world of difference between his consciousness and hers. My hair grows incredibly quickly, so I had to bleach it so much that the roots wouldn't be visible after filming my movie. It's a long, arduous, and occasionally hilarious process for me because I can't sit still, but it worked. Number 6. Nothing had prepared her. She deliberately provoked people. Johnny Carson always took great care to be well prepared for his broadcasts. Those who had the opportunity to work with him attest that this was more than simply cramming for tests or practicing lines. Bringing an air of professionalism and care to every part was key, as was showing appreciation for the visitor and the viewers. Carson supposedly saw Madonna's seeming lack of comparable preparation as a major setback for her career. According to a producer who was a part of The Tonight Show during that time, Johnny liked it when guests contributed meaningfully. He enjoyed it when guests treated their presence with the same seriousness he did when hosting, whether it was with an insightful story, well-thought-out comments, or just intelligent questions. Several sources claim that Carson saw calculated provocation in Madonna's appearance rather than preparation, a tactic that used shock as a stand-in for substance, which Carson viewed as cynical and lazy. According to an on-air writer, Johnny could discern when a guest was being intentionally controversial versus when they were just trying to draw attention to themselves. As long as it was genuine, he had no issue with people having strong ideas or using edgy humor. Instead of using provocative language to convey deeper meaning, he found that it seemed to be Madonna's central focus. According to reports, Carson was especially let down by this strategy because of Madonna's evident brilliance and talent. Those who knew his thoughts to the situation said he thought she could have engaged in more meaningful conversation, but opted for shock value instead. Madonna was someone with real talent and cultural importance in Johnny's eyes. The producer continued. That's why her reliance on juvenile provocation was so frustrating to him. It was like watching a gifted pianist choose to play chopsticks over and over, instead of showing what they were really capable of. What reportedly bothered Carson most wasn't the provocative content itself, but its apparent purposelessness shock that existed for its own sake, rather than in service of any larger point or genuine self-expression. Johnny had interviewed genuinely controversial figures throughout his career. Political radicals, boundary-pushing comedians, cultural revolutionaries, explained the writer. What distinguished them from Madonna, in his view, was that their provocation served some purpose beyond simple attention-seeking. They were trying to express something meaningful, whereas Madonna seemed to be merely trying to create a tabloid moment. This perception reportedly transformed what might have been mere disappointment into something closer to professional disdain. Carson's reaction to what he viewed as a talented performer, deliberately underperforming for easy attention, rather than engaging in genuine communication. Johnny had a saying backstage, "Don't confuse attention with accomplishment," recalled the producer. He felt Madonna was pursuing the former at the expense of the latter. And for someone who valued substance as much as Johnny did, that was almost unforgivable. Madonna, I hope you'll come back with us. I trust that you enjoyed yourself. Thank you both for 7. She didn't play the game. The Tonight Show under Johnny Carson operated according to certain unspoken rules that created its distinctive blend of spontaneity within structure. According to those familiar with Carson's approach, what particularly troubled him about Madonna's appearance was her apparent unwillingness to participate in this collaborative dynamic that had made the show successful for decades. Johnny viewed The Tonight Show as a sort of game that everyone agreed to play together, explained a producer who worked closely with Carson. The host asks questions that create opportunities for the guest to shine. The guest responds in ways that allow for natural conversation and occasional humor. Everyone understands there's a format and purpose to the exchange, even while creating the illusion of casual conversation. According to multiple accounts, Madonna seemed either unwilling or unable to participate in this basic framework, instead attempting to impose her own agenda on the segment without regard for the show's established format. The best guests knew how to work within Johnny's framework, while still being authentic and occasionally surprising, noted a director who worked on the show. They understood there was a rhythm to the show, when to tell a story, when to respond directly, when to let Johnny lead with a joke. Madonna ignored all those unspoken rules, which made genuine entertainment almost impossible to create. This disregard for the show's established format reportedly frustrated Carson, not just personally, but professionally. As someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of the television interview, he viewed Madonna's approach as not just difficult, but fundamentally disrespectful to the medium itself. Johnny once told me that great talk show appearances were like great dancing. Two individuals who were familiar with the same steps recalled a writer who worked with Carson. With Madonna, he felt like he was trying to waltz while she was doing an entirely different dance to entirely different music. There was no coordination possible. What made this particularly disappointing for Carson, according to those who knew him well, was that he viewed this collaborative approach as beneficial to guests rather than restrictive. The framework existed to help them present themselves effectively to the audience, not to limit their self-expression. Johnny created a structure that was designed to make guests look their best. The producer continued, "When someone rejected that structure, they weren't just making his task more difficult. The audience was finding it harder to relate to them because of this. He found that frustrating because ultimately, everyone lost in that scenario." Carson's response to this situation reportedly demonstrated his own mastery of the very framework Madonna seemed to be rejecting. Rather than creating an awkward confrontation, he maintained his professional demeanor while gradually reducing his own investment in the segment, creating a clear contrast between his own collaborative approach and what he perceived as her self-focused performance. Johnny essentially demonstrated the right way to do television by continuing to play his role properly, even as Madonna refused to play hers, observed the director. It was a masterclass in professionalism under difficult circumstances, and it made her approach look all the more inappropriate by comparison. "Somebody told me you were a waitress at one time." "Yeah, but I wasn't really good. Yeah, 8. She was banned softly but firmly. Johnny Carson rarely banned guests outright from The Tonight Show. Throughout his 30-year tenure, he maintained a reputation for professional courtesy, even with difficult personalities, generally believing that a bad appearance deserved a second chance rather than permanent exile. Madonna, however, reportedly joined the small and notorious group of performers who were quietly but definitively removed from Carson's guest list following her 1987 appearance, a decision that spoke volumes about how deeply her approach had violated his standards for his program. Johnny didn't make a public announcement or tell the press Madonna was banned, explained a booking coordinator who worked on the show during this period. That wasn't his style. Instead, he simply told the booking team, "I think we've had enough of Madonna for a while." Everyone understood exactly what that meant. She wouldn't be invited back during his tenure. This quiet but firm approach to banning was characteristic of Carson's management style. According to those who worked with him, he preferred to handle such decisions privately, rather than create additional drama through public declarations. Johnny didn't believe in burning bridges publicly, noted a producer who worked closely with Carson. He understood the entertainment industry was built on relationships, and explicit public bans could create unnecessary problems for everyone involved. Instead, he simply made his wishes known internally, and the staff respected them absolutely. What made this ban particularly significant was its longevity. According to multiple sources, Madonna remained on Carson's do not book list for the remainder of his time as host, a period that stretched from her 1987 appearance until his retirement in 1992. It wasn't a cooling off period or a temporary reaction, confirmed the booking coordinator. Madonna's name simply never appeared on our potential guest lists again. It was understood throughout the organization that her Tonight Show appearances ended with that 1987 interview period. This permanent exclusion placed Madonna in rare company. According to those familiar with the show's booking practices, only a handful of other performers received similar treatment throughout Carson's 3 decades as host, most commonly for behavior that Carson considered not just difficult, but fundamentally disrespectful to the program and its audience. Johnny was remarkably forgiving of nervousness, mistakes, or even occasional difficulties. The producer continued, "What got you permanently banned was behavior that demonstrated a basic disrespect for what The Tonight Show represented. It seemed like Madonna's performance that night really crossed the line." Johnny thought the ban was important for more than just The Tonight Show. People in the entertainment industry said that if Carson didn't like a performer, it could hurt their reputation across television. Other shows would take his ratings for guests as a sign of how worth it they were, so to speak. Johnny never told other shows not to book Madonna, Johnny said. That wasn't his style, the booking coordinator said. But back then, other hosts and producers would take note if Johnny Carson didn't want someone on his show. The industry looked up to his standards as the benchmark, countless times. Yeah, and many say you look just like Marilyn Monroe. Yeah, but that's only because our hair colors are same. From my perspective, that's the end of the comparison. There are 9. The show's reputation took a hit that night because of her. Over the course of its 30 years on air, Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show struck a remarkable balance, appealing to both the more cultured and more traditional tastes of middle-class Americans. Sources close to the matter say that Carson was most bothered by Madonna's appearance, since it momentarily tarnished the reputation he had painstakingly built over the years. An employee of the show's production team remarked that Johnny had built this incredible television institution that families all throughout the United States relied on. Parents could go to sleep with The Tonight Show on because they knew their teens would only be exposed to age-inappropriate content. Johnny found it deeply unsettling how Madonna's appearance momentarily betrayed that confidence. Several sources claim that Carson was quite worried about the segment's reception among the show's regular viewers. People in more traditional valued areas, such as Carson's home state of Nebraska, Iowa, and Ohio, were the target audience. The writer, who was intimately associated with Johnny Carson, made the observation that Johnny never lost sight of his roots. Since he shared Middle American sentiments, he was able to empathize with their experiences. According to reports, he was concerned that Madonna's blatantly sexual style may turn off longtime fans of the show. Reruns and syndication of the segment were subject to Carson's unprecedented request for extensive editing, which he presumably made out of concern. People familiar with the post-production process claim that the interview was heavily edited to remove some of Madonna's more explicit remarks before it was included in the repeat broadcasts. According to a post-production supervisor who was a part of the show, Johnny seldom requested major changes to the interviews. For better or worse, he thought it was important to stick with what had aired live. He clearly thought the Madonna piece was troublesome because he asked for major edits to it. Carson supposedly said the piece was unairable in its original form, which is quite an evaluation coming from someone who had presided over thousands of interviews covering every possible topic and tone. According to staff members, Johnny cared nothing about feeling ashamed of himself. The producer made it clear that he was concerned about The Tonight Show's reputation and brand, which he had spent the better part of 3 decades cultivating, and which stood for an ideal of excellence and style. He thought Madonna had done some temporary damage to that brand that needed fixing. Reportedly, Carson's character was exposed by his care about the program's reputation. His feeling of duty extended beyond himself to the institution he had founded, and the millions of people who had watched it night after night for decades. The author elaborated on Johnny's belief that The Tonight Show was about more than just him. People all around the nation placed a high value on this American institution. To him, Madonna's presence seemed to be a betrayal of the audience's implicit expectation of that establishment. That was the one thing he could never forgive. In the presence of Mr. Wells, you make Wimpy appear weak. 10. When it happened, Carson's tolerance for the antics of celebrities began to waver. The Madonna performance supposedly marked a watershed moment in Johnny Carson and his staff's approach to booking and handling celebrities, especially younger stars who may value shocking moments more than meaningful conversation, though they had dealt with difficult guests before. An ex-Tonight Show talent coordinator stated that after Madonna, there was a clear shift in our booking strategy. Around this time, Johnny started to be much pickier about which up-and-coming artists he invited on the show, favoring those with more controversial public personas than substantial body of work. According to many accounts after the Madonna visit, Carson gave his booking crew new rules that stressed the importance of guests who knew and followed the show's rules and format. According to the talent coordinator, Johnny said that substance, not sensation, should be the main focus. We didn't use the word viral moment back then, but he wanted people with real ideas, not simply those trying to make a quick buck. When we were having internal discussions about possible bookings, Madonna became the cautionary story that we referred to. Guests' pre-appearance preparations were allegedly also affected by this change, going beyond the original booking decisions. Staff members saw an improvement in the pre-ins, which now include more detailed explanations of Carson's expectations for guests regarding proper topic and conversational involvement. A producer in charge of guest relations noted that the team became considerably more forthright with managers and publicists on their requirements. Before booking someone with a history of disruptive conduct, we would have an open conversation about appropriate limits. The invitation would be rescinded if they refused to cooperate with our guidelines. There have been rumors that Carson started cutting parts short when he felt they were going in an unacceptable direction. This was an unusual action on his part before to the Madonna performance, but he used it multiple times afterwards whenever the guests didn't live up to the show's expectations. Johnny developed this very subtle signal to the control room, remarked an on-set director. When he touched his tie in a specific way, we knew it was time to go to commercial early. It was his way of getting out of segments that were going too far into Madonna territory. The impact on talk show culture as a whole was what really made this change noteworthy. The late-night television industry was rocked when Carson became the unchallenged leader, and other shows followed suit, setting a precedent that reverberated across the board. According to the producer, Johnny basically made it clear that even the greatest stars had to follow the rules of the shows they were on. That may sound like stating the obvious now, but it was a major boundary during the time when celebrities were becoming more powerful. No one wants to follow Madonna's example anymore. Even after Carson left the stage, his influence shaped how talk shows deal with the delicate balancing act of letting celebrities vent while keeping the show's framework and standards intact. According to the talent coordinator, The Tonight Show was actually made stronger by the Madonna debacle. It compelled us to spell out in greater detail what set the show apart and what kind of visitors could bolster rather than detract from that goal. Until you face opposition, you may not have a clear picture of your principles.